In your book, you start with a real sense of urgency about what is happening in terms of mental health. What is your plea at this moment?
I think that we really need to move towards a more integrated and holistic idea and conceptualization of mental health. My experience has been working with psychological illness, that it's very, very disparate. We have one group of mental health professionals over here, neuroscience professionals over here, psychiatrists over here, and then there's the physical health. And everybody's working in their own individual silos, as if the brain is this kind of disembodied entity that has nothing to do with the rest of the body. That doesn't make any sense. And what I think it means is that we miss out on opportunities either for intervention, early intervention and treatment, but also for prevention, which isn't really a concept that we apply in mental health in the same way that we apply to physical health. And I think we're really missing important opportunities there.
In one section, I was really struck in particular when you talked about dementia and Alzheimer's, and quite often we just think of that diagnosis as a fait accompli, and in fact, there's a prevention side, but we can also do a lot more to ease what is, it's always referred to as a burden, but to ease what is a terrible problem in our society.
Yeah, most people assume, so it's the illness that most adults are afraid of getting. So after kind of 40, 45, if you ask people, what are you really frightened of? That's the number one illness condition that they're concerned about. But it's also the one that most people feel like there's nothing they can do about it, that you just kind of have to cross your fingers, hope that you've got good genes, hope that you get lucky, and that you'll manage to miss being struck down by it. The issue with that is that it's the leading cause of death in the UK, in England and Wales, but also that the latest International Lancet Commission on Alzheimer's and dementia says that actually with changes in lifestyle, and sometimes they are kind of, for some people, they would be quite big changes, but with changes in lifestyle and health habits, we could delay or prevent 40% of global cases of dementia. So there's an enormous amount of influence that we do have. And unfortunately, not many people know that. They think it's genes or just kind of the luck of the draw, but actually there's a lot of power in our hands, more than we think.
You yourself are a nutritionist. I didn't realize that you had been a contestant on the British Bake Off. I don't get that show over here, but obviously that's you're also trained in psychology as well, I believe. So in terms of nutrition specifically, what do you think that we can really be doing to enhance our health? There's so many things out there that are sold as health supplements. How do you differentiate between the good and the bad, and what's waste of money? What is really an investment in your future health and your health of your brain?
Mm-hmm. Well, what the evidence suggests is actually there are a few, if you wanted to kind of break it down to 3 or 5 most important things, the evidence suggests that daily leafy green vegetables are really important. So just a handful or a small salad bowl of something like spinach and rocket, kale, dark green cabbage, that kind of thing. So a daily serving of greens, adequate intake of omega-3 fatty acids. So 1 to 2 servings per week of oily fish like trout, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, that sort of thing. And increasing your intake of fiber. So not a single age group in the UK or the US is meeting the fiber recommendations, but we know that when your gut microbiome breaks down fiber, it produces compounds that protect the lining of the gut, but also protect the gut-brain barrier as well, which protects the integrity of what happens in the brain and stops things that might be potentially toxic or harmful from crossing over from the bloodstream into the brain. So really, I'd be saying to people, add a handful of greens to whatever you're eating. You don't have to overhaul your diet. Add a handful of greens to whatever you're eating. Try to eat maybe berries a few times a week, eat more beans. And if you can switch your kind of white carbohydrates, your white pasta, your white bread to brown pasta, brown rice, a wholemeal bread, then you'll be moving your overall diet in the direction of something that is more supportive of long-term brain health.
with physical illness, there are symptoms and people think they are, we should look at those symptoms and treat them. But with mental health, I get the feeling that it's sometimes not taken as seriously. And the connection between the two in particular is not understood. It's a point that I really appreciated in your book, is that these things are stuck together. You can't have one without the other, and they're mutually dependent. So, do you think that message is getting out into the health community, into the medical professions, and more broadly socially, that it's not just catch a grip of yourself? This is a real problem.
Yeah, I think increasingly, and I think at the moment, most of that, of the kind of translation of that message has come through the gut health sphere. People are very, very interested in gut-brain axis, and they're very interested in the notion, which is problematic in its own way, of kind of healing your gut, but it's starting to at least convey the message that things that happen neck down do pertain to what's happening in your brain. I think when it comes to gut health, there is still a huge amount that we don't know. So it's not quite as easy as saying, heal your gut, heal your brain. But what I think is helpful is that it does start to help people to start thinking, okay, so maybe what happens in my body, the conditions of my physicality have a contribution to what's happening in my brain. Of course, because your brain is fed by everything that you eat. It's oxygenated by every breath that you take, all of the available glucose, and whether you're insulin resistant, all of those things will affect how well nourished and how well served and how easily your brain can remove toxins, metabolic byproducts. So of course, it makes sense that these things are connected. There's still a lot that we need to learn, but if we can start helping people to think, actually, the food I eat isn't just about whether it makes me fatter or thinner, but also whether it's contributing to what my brain needs to function well, then I think we'll be shifting the entire population into a better direction.
Another aspect of your book that I appreciated a lot is the early chapters, where you go into a bit, not too heavily, but into the approach to research and your approach to a bit of science about the brain and how it works. And as you said there, you're quite measured in what you say. You don't say this will cure everything. You've got evidence is saying that this looks like it is very important, and you use quite measured language, I find, in your book, and you don't overstate the claims.
I'm glad you said that, because I want to be careful not to. I don't. I know that big sensationalist claims are punchy and they would drive sales, but I don't want to really. People have a poor understanding of mental illness. And I think it does a disservice to patients to oversimplify the causes of it, the severity of it, the extent of it. I think it can be very, very stigmatizing and blaming to suggest that, oh, you're depressed just because you don't eat well enough, or just because, it can be, what I don't want is to kind of give ammunition to people who think, oh, it's all in your hands and you just need to try harder. I think what we need to understand is that things like depression are complex, multifaceted illnesses, and that they will, while they present in perhaps similar ways for some people, they will have different driving factors. And for some people, those driving factors will be around their diet and lifestyle. And for some people, they won't. And then there's going to be a group of people in the middle who might just be supported alongside therapy, alongside medication, to feeling better. But I don't want to appear to be, or to be accused to be, saying, oh, it's all in your hands, it's all very simple, just try harder, and this is the cure for a problem which is actually very, very complex and needs a lot of intervention.
And you do make a plea at the end of your book to policymakers. Maybe I should try to get that message out in Brussels for the EU, that there are things that we can do societally, and it's not, like you say, it's not completely in your own hands. How you're treated at work, how your access to green space and things like this. these all can be massive contributing factors.
Yeah, like some of the biggest influences on things like depression, some of the kind of intervention studies have just given people more money. You know, they take a group of people with depression and they've just given them a little bit more money, which just eases the burden perhaps on paying the bills or being able to afford more nutritious food or just the family stress. And that has reduced their depression risk. So we need to understand that it's not just about how much exercising you're getting or the nutritional intake you're getting. Your mental health is an interaction between you and the environment. And part of that environment is nutrition and exercise, but part of that environment is your experience of trauma, your experience of stress, your experience of prejudice, your experience of poverty, and your opportunities to recover from those things. And in that realm, so much of that is outside of individual control. So much of that is really about policy. It's about making sure that children born into poor families have access to good education, access to good healthcare, access to good nutrition. It's making sure that wages and benefits stay in line with inflation so that people aren't pushed into poverty and destitution. It's making sure that there are properly funded mental health treatment centers so that people, before they get terribly ill, because we know the longer that a mental health condition goes on, the more embedded it becomes and the more difficult it is to treat, so that people can get treatment earlier and so that they're more likely to recover more quickly. And all of that is in the hands of policymakers. So, you know, I didn't want to appear again to be blaming individuals for their circumstances. I really wanted us to understand these conditions are complex. There is some of the power is in our hands, and there's a little bit of personal responsibility. I'm not against personal responsibility, but we need to understand that actually our life status, our standard of living plays a huge part in that as well.
So going back to the what we can do in the meantime until we sort out all these public policy issues, is you know, you go through different chapters and you look at different questions. You know, what would you say? I'm going to try to ask you to, what would be your 3 top things you would like to see us do something about in our lives?
I think the most robust evidence base we have is physical activity. So both in terms of reducing risk of depression, so regular physical activity reduces risk of depression, but it's also one of the best interventions for reducing your risk of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. So, and that should be a combination of aerobic activity and resistance training. So load bearing, weight bearing exercise to build muscle strength is really important for building kind of neurological strength as well. So exercise, trying to increase your physical activity, and even short bouts of activity can be supportive for that. I think more broadly, managing your blood glucose, managing your blood sugar, in as far as trying to prevent pre-diabetes and diabetes, because we know that those 2 things, those 2 conditions significantly increase your risk of Alzheimer's disease. And insulin resistance may be also associated with depression as well. And that means, again, regular exercise and also eating a kind of low glycemic, whole food, fiber-rich diet to help give you nice, steady blood sugar levels. And then after that, I suppose it's important to say the main thing that is linked to your long-term well-being and even your longevity is the quality of your relationships. So again, not just to give the impression that it's all about, you know, me out on my own in the world, eating berries and living a good life. It's really important that you understand that our nervous systems depend on other people for regulation. We're not made to deal with stress, pressure, pain, trauma by ourselves. Actually, we need other people to support us and help to bring us back down to homeostasis, to our baseline level. And, you know, certainly in London, it's a very competitive, fast-paced and itinerant population. People, they move to London for a little bit and then they move away, or they move around in the city. So it can be quite difficult to build community and to build those connections. But if you can and where you can, it's really important to try to do that. You know, join a choir, join a a reading group, a book club, because having those connections is really supportive for your stress management. And we know that managing your stress is really important for overall health, including your mental health long term.
Another chapter that I liked a lot was the chapter on sleep, where I'm probably a bit of an offender, especially if I've got looking at social media. Being a journalist following news, I sometimes find it hard to detach myself from Twitter and things like that.
Sure,
but
sure.
To what extent do we need to, look at how much sleep we have? I mean, some people are very dogmatic. It has to be 8 hours. One of the things I liked in your book, because I am an evening person, I don't think of myself as a bit of a morning person, is that you don't insist that I leap out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Oh no, I don't think of anything worse. My brain doesn't start working properly until about 10 o'clock. So no, it's absolutely not the case. And I think that's the difficulty for people who are kind of moderately evening or evening people, is that actually most of life is set up for the morning people. You need to be, up by 6 or 7 to be in the office by 8 or 9, doing all, and even in schools, the most important lessons in the UK, your math, science, English, are in the morning. And so everything is set up to serve the morning people. But I think
we need a revolution.
We do, we really do. Rights for the evening people, for the night owls. No, and I think so we need to understand that we all have our own chronotype. So whether we're morning larks or night owls, morning or evening people, and that really you're going to get the best out of your brain, the best productivity, the best energy, the best mood, if you try to respect those patterns in yourself. It's not always possible, but where it is possible, I suggest, if you have the option to speak to your boss and start your work a little bit later, so you finish a bit later, but it works better for you, then maybe have that negotiation, have that conversation. There's no point, there's no value in trying to force it, because really it's genetically driven, and that's just what it is. So trying to make sure that you can augment your lifestyle to fit your chronotype is going to give you kind of the best outcomes.
And finally, if I could ask, I didn't know about your baking expertise, but cakes are good for us, is that correct?
An essential food group.
Marvelous, yes.
I feel the important point there is really that even in the intervention studies that have looked at taking people with depression and improving their diet, what they have allowed is for people to eat sweet things about 3 times a week, so every other day. So it's not the case, certainly for most people, that you have to completely overhaul your diet, that you have to just plow through piles and piles of raw vegetables. That's no way to live. Food is about, as well as nutrition and taking care of yourself, it's also about pleasure and socializing and engaging with friends and catching up with your best friend over pizza. And I think we also need to hold on to those things. And so if you've got a broadly healthy diet and you're eating all your beans and your oily fish and your leafy greens, and then a piece of cake is not going to be a problem.
That is such a relief. Kimberley Wilson, thank you so very much indeed. I've loved your book, and I hope that others will get the chance to read it and be inspired by it. It's got lots of very practical information in it, and I think another thing that you do is you do doable plans where you choose quite sort of straightforward, simple little things that we can do to really make a difference. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you.